Welcome to this week's installment of Today and Tomorrow in Scottsdale with Don Henniger. I'm Don. With me is my podcast partner and friend of everyone in Scottsdale, Kevin Maxwell.
Mr. DH, how are you today, sir?
Doing fantastic, man. Thank you so much. Good. We're in a new year.
We are.
Can't wait. Happy New Year to you, too.
Let me be the first.
This is our first segment of the new year, and it's a pretty darn good one. We've got two amazing guests with us today, Marion Kelly and Sarah Kearney. Both going to talk about the community for celebrating diversity, which is an important aspect of our town, and we have probably the two most important people that relate to that organization with us today. So welcome, Marion. Welcome, Sarah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Happy New Year to both of you.
You bet. So usually we start off the podcast with a little bit of news in the start of this deal, but this being the first of the year, Kevin, let's talk about last year and next year.
Let's do it.
And Marion and Sarah, you can join in on the conversation with us too. Favorite moments from last year, Kevin? What's a highlight for you?
Oh, I don't know. You know, it's going to sound a little strange, but, you know, even though the election process was really drawn out and kind of strange, we got back to having some in-person events. We got to go evaluate our candidates in person rather than virtual.
We did.
And that was kind of nice, actually.
Yep.
So we really got to be able to know who we were voting for, and that we didn't get that the last election. So that was kind of something I remember from last year.
That was a big highlight. The work I'm doing with the Carter Center out of Atlanta was the idea of just having fair, safe, and secure elections. And we went into this primary or into this midterm not knowing whether that was going to play out, and it worked out okay.
Yeah.
So I thought that was kind of a highlight too. Sarah, what was your favorite moment of the year?
We developed and designed unique and exceptional experiences in Scottsdale for Experience Scottsdale, and I got to be the project liaison for that. So we have 15 exceptionally Scottsdale experiences that visitors, locals, groups, and meetings can book. So that was a really fun
awesome.
highlight of 2022.
And you've got a big 2023 coming up too.
We sure do.
Yeah. Marion, what was your favorite moment of last year?
You know, from a work perspective, I guess I'd have to say at Mayo Clinic, we've been able to connect with some communities that don't have access to health care.
Yeah.
And so we've been able to provide charity health care to some organizations and individuals that otherwise would not have a place to go for care. From a personal standpoint, though, I think it was an opportunity for me to unplug and reprioritize life and figure out what's important and why is this more important that other thing was that I thought was important at one point. And it's sort of, you know, I guess as we're getting older, Don, I guess that it sort of is a place where we get in life where we start figuring out what's important.
Isn't that the truth?
And that was a great time for me.
Do you have lessons on that you can share with us?
Well, I have bonded with grandchildren like you
Oh,
wouldn't believe.
there you go. Yeah.
And so I have 4 incredible grandchildren I fortunately got to live with for about 9 months over in California. And I was working remotely.
Good for you.
And it changed my perspective.
Really?
Love that idea. That is really cool. Yeah. Sarah, what's ahead for you in 2023? What do you hope will happen in 2023?
Wow, everything is back in action. And so I think it's just exciting to have the vibrancy and the energy and having people be able to be together and celebrate together and come up with new ideas and dream big and think big and then work together to collaborate and accomplish them. And I think this city has all the right people and components to be able to do that. So I don't know specifically what that means and looks like, but I think good things are ahead in 2023.
I love it. That's great. Marion, what about you for the year ahead?
2023 brings that 65th birthday for me, Don. And I'm trying to decide what the future looks like.
Oh, yeah.
And is that future continuing to work? Or is that future enjoying my grandchildren? Is that future building a consulting firm? I don't know. But it's exciting just to be thinking about those things.
Fork in the road for you this year. Coming
Absolutely.
up. Good for you. That's awesome. Kevin, what are you going to do this year? What's a highlight for you?
The highlight for me this year is it's a goal to beat you in golf.
Wow, I think you might be able to achieve that. My game
No,
is not
it's not.
very good, man.
No, it's not. We've last 3 or 4 times we've played together, you've beaten me solidly, but I'm gonna try to put the game together one day. It's gonna get you.
I'm going to make sure you get that goal accomplished.
No, you're not. I don't want you to sandbag on me
He's
now.
going to let you win.
Yeah, I don't want that.
Well,
I don't
let's
want
not say it
that.
like that. Let's make a pact.
Yeah.
That we go out and play a bunch this
Yeah,
year.
there we go.
That
Get
way,
more opportunities.
More opportunities.
Yeah.
Exactly right.
Now, how about you, Don? What you're looking forward to?
So, I don't know if this is a right way to say it or not, but I'm looking for new leadership to evolve this year around all aspects of our community, of our city, of our schools, of the state. I think this would be a great year to get new leadership in the pipeline. I'm talking to all four of us have been Scottsdale leadership supporters and alumni, and so that's certainly one way of sort of framing what I'm thinking about right now. But it's time for new and robust and innovative leadership to kind of come to the forefront in the city and all the organizations in the city. So I'm hoping this will be a year of new leadership.
Yeah,
I would agree with that, Don. So I came here 25 years ago. And I remember my very first meeting at the Scottsdale Chamber. And I looked around the room and there were these giants of Scottsdale.
Right.
They were all on the board. And I'm 25 years later and I'm still there and some of them are as well.
Mm-hmm.
And we need new, fresh water.
Yep.
Not that our history and what it took to build this beautiful community in which we live and work and play. But we need new thinking. We need new, fresh ideas that will take us to the next level, whatever that is.
Totally agree. At every level that we exist right now. And that's hard to do. And maybe there's ways we can promote that and encourage that as we go through into the course of the new year and make that happen. That would be wonderful. Well, the good thing about today is we've got two great leaders that are already here as guests. Marion, with all of the work you've done in our community and all the work you've done at Mayo, and Sarah, what you've got going with Experience Scottsdale and all the great leadership that you've had there, plus all of your other community activities. We couldn't ask for two more role model leaders to have with us in the room today, so we appreciate you being here. Yeah. And really what we're here to talk about today is a really important initiative with a lot of good, rich history in Scottsdale, and that's the Community Celebrating Diversity. It's been around here now for almost 30 years. Marion, you've been around for most of those, I know. It originally formed to promote diversity in Scottsdale, and it's grown a lot since then. It was the first city outside of Phoenix to host its own Martin Luther King celebration in Arizona. And even now it's regarded probably as one of the best Martin Luther King celebrations in the whole state. So it's really done well. And that celebration is coming up right around the corner, January the 12th. So we're right on the edge of that happening again. So let's get into this a little bit. And Sarah, why don't you start us off, because you're president of the board now, and talk a little bit about the group, how it got started, and whatever you miss in between. Marion's going to fill in between the gaps anyway. So let's see how you get it started.
It sure is. And so it's really a wonderful story, which is what got me most interested in getting involved with the organization. And in 1993, Sandra Rembrandt went to Don Logan at the city and said, "Why can't we have an MLK celebration event here in Scottsdale?" And I think Don said, "If you can make it happen, then let's do it." And that's when the birth of us, Community Celebrating Diversity and CCD was born, along with our own MLK celebration event. So yes, this will be the 29th year of its in existence. It's great because when you think about some of those really iconic people in this community, they were all part of the beginning of this organization as well. So when we say Don Logan and Sandra Rembrandt and Art Decabooter and Cindy Slick, and these are names that are, I think, iconic in Scottsdale, and they definitely had their impact in other organizations and the development and the foundation of those organizations. So this is one that it's honor and to be part of almost 30 years later, and continuing on the legacy that they paved the way from the get-go. So that's, again, Marion can probably fill in the gaps a little bit more. But
as I think about the history, I'm just reflecting on the fact that we have had, since CCD's existence, every president of Scottsdale Community College on the board.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
We have had every police chief, every fire chief, someone that represents the mayor's office, and then corporate America, not-for-profit America in Scottsdale, that is. And it has been 30 years of the making of a great organization who has been solid, has been consistent, and has some direction in which to go, and hopefully some impact and legacy that is left even beyond us, Sarah.
Agreed.
No question about that. Marion, when you first got involved, when you think back at all the 23 years you've been there now? 25 years. What comes to mind as some of the highlights and sort of the memorable moments, if you will, during that time?
CCD was the first board I joined when I moved to Scottsdale. I transferred from Mayo Clinic, Arizona, to Mayo Clinic, Arizona, from Mayo Clinic, Minnesota. And Don Logan and I met, and he said, I have a great place for you. We need you on the board of CCD. I didn't know what CCD was. I didn't even know. And he said CCD, didn't tell me what it stood for. And he talked about the MLK dinner. And interestingly enough, I had been asked just previous to that, when I worked in the U.S. Senate, to serve on the National MLK
No kidding.
Planning Committee
Wow.
for the national holiday. And I ended up not doing it, but I thought, wow, I've come full circle. And, you know, politics are local and community is local. And so to start here in Scottsdale, where I lived, worked, and played, it only made sense for me to join that board. And it's been a phenomenal 25 years. We've brought in some phenomenal speakers, which also bring a phenomenal following.
Yep.
Because the names of our speakers sometimes denote who our audience will be.
Oh, that's great.
And so we have seen a very diverse Scottsdale during the MLK celebration that we may not see throughout the rest of the year.
Good point.
And so it's been an aspect to Scottsdale that I feel has brought some diversity and equity and inclusion right here in our backyard.
We've needed that so much. I mean, I was in the news a long time in the newspaper business, and around when we had a governor named Evan Meekum, who killed our original statewide MLK holiday.
Yeah.
Cost us a Super Bowl. Speaking of Super Bowls coming up, and we finally got back to where we restored that from a statewide basis. But it's so important to me to see my hometown city, Scottsdale, taking a lead like it has over the past almost 3 decades of doing this good work. So it's just so reassuring.
But that's a story of resiliency, though, right?
Yep.
I mean, that's our city being resilient and having something taken away from us on the state level, and decided that we need to do it on a community level.
Yep.
And do the right thing for our community. And so that's to me, that's what resonates with me about that.
And sustain it, right?
It's sustainable, and I was about to say that the ROI that CCD brings is that we invest in our youth. And so CCD exists in order to give scholarships to young people in Scottsdale high schools and surrounding communities that are active in diversity-related work. The opportunity to have a scholarship to go to college. I don't even know what that number is that we've given over these 30 years, and Sarah might. But we
52 scholarships to be
52
Is that right?
scholarships
Wow, that's
over
really
30
good.
years.
Yeah.
And that's significant, and that's what keeps me coming back.
I love that. Sarah, talk some more about that whole program, because I don't think a lot of people may be aware of that. How does it work? How does that 52 scholarships, which is amazing, and just what are some more details behind that?
Absolutely. Yep. We have a scholarship opportunity that's available to all Arizona high school students to apply for. There's different areas, more general education. There's also a STEM specific scholarship that's available that they can apply for. And it really is, we've heard stories from some of our recipients about how it afforded them the opportunity to be able to pay for important resources to attend college. A requirement is that they utilize the funds to go to an Arizona college or university, but at what capacity, that is at their discretion. And it is pretty amazing what our young people in this community are doing in the diversity, equity, inclusion space. So it's one of my favorite things that we do to, as part of this organization, is we would love to have more applications coming in and continue to grow that scholarship pot so that we can award more and maybe even bigger funds for the future. But that is something that's very special about this organization that we always prioritize as an important initiative.
It was also a part of an initiative to retain our talent, because at one time we were seeing that we would have these bright kids in our high schools and they grow up and go to college and not return.
Yeah.
And so we thought, if we support them now, they will be local. They'll support us later. They'll come back, see the value. And I don't know that we've done 100% of that, but I have seen past recipients all over the place in the city.
Fantastic.
That were scholarship recipients. There are 2 twins that come to mind. One of them is now a physician, and her sister, I believe, is in advertising. They were scholarship recipients right here from Scottsdale. One of them's local and one of them's not. But 50% ain't bad.
That's not bad at all. No. Well, what a great investment that is in kids and returning back and staying contributing members of our community. That's a fantastic deal. Yeah. So what's the business behind all that? You rely on sponsors, right? So that you can fund that. Talk to us a little bit about what's behind the curtain in terms of how that all comes together.
Yeah, it really is all around our annual MLK celebration event. And that's where we get amazing support from this community and corporations and businesses that help sponsor being able to fund those scholarships, as well as put on a Youth Voices event as well, which is a similar event to the celebration event, just adapted to our middle school and high school audience, which provides them the opportunity to get a keynote from our keynote speaker that attends the celebration. So, it really is all around our partners and our companies that are supporting our organization being able to help fuel those scholarships.
It's also attached us to the Hispanic celebration that we do every year in this city. And Helen, when she was a part of the police department, made sure that we stayed connected with the Hispanic community and supported that. And so while the MLK celebration is the only fundraiser event that we do each year, there are other events that we support and or champion throughout the community. And so as I think about impact, sometimes you don't know the impact that an organization has had until you sit down and have this conversation.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And I am thinking, wow, I forgot about that.
Yeah.
I didn't think about voices as it is a CCD initiative. Without it, we probably it wouldn't occur. But it is another way of connecting us to young people.
Yeah, perfect. And you do that in partnership with SUSD, right?
We sure do.
Okay.
I mean, it is an unbelievable community collaborative, this organization. And the partnership with Scottsdale Unified School District and superintendent also serves on our board, and even at the next level with Scottsdale Community College. Again, these are long-standing partners that as people have changed and roles have changed, they've stayed engaged and committed to the organization, which I think is instrumental in the success and the sustainability for the future.
But neither could we exist without corporate sponsorship.
Right, of course.
So we have every major corporation, at least in Scottsdale and the greater Phoenix community, at one time or another has been a sponsor. There are longtime sponsors, APS being one of them, Mayo Clinic, others, law firms that are local to Scottsdale, you name it, have been here to support CCD. And at one time we had staff, and our staff were really taking the proceeds that we would do at the fundraiser, and it just didn't make sense to continue that model. So the board decided to roll its sleeves up and do the work of CCD to keep it sustainable. And as a result of that, we are now a very healthy not-for-profit organization that is sustainable into the future.
That's fantastic, yeah.
One thing I always liked about the event every year is you have great keynotes. Who's your keynote this year, or who are some of your keynotes in the past that stood out to you?
So this year we have Dr. Benjamin Chavis, who's going to be joining us, and I didn't want to mess up, so I brought some notes so I can give you a little bit more background about Dr. Chavis.
Yeah.
But he is a reverend, he's an entrepreneur, he's a global business leader, educator, chemist, civil rights leader, NAACP Life member, syndicated columnist, theologian, and author, and is currently the president and CEO of the National Newspaper Publishers Association. So
That's
the
why I knew his
NNPA.
name. That's why I knew his
Yeah,
name.
me too. I was trying
right.
to figure out. I was Googling
Well,
right
at
now.
one time he was the national director, CEO, if you will, of the NAACP.
Oh, that's probably why I know his name too. Yeah, what a great speaker.
Yeah, and he actually also served as a statewide youth coordinator in North Carolina for Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. So that's pretty cool.
I think you got a pretty good speaker this year.
Well, he brings the history, but he
Yeah.
also brings the experience since 1968 when we lost Dr. King,
Yep.
that he continued the work. And that's what CCD and the MLK event is about, is really forwarding the work, passing off the baton to the next generation that's going to bring celebration of diversity to each of our communities.
That's good, yeah. Who are some of your favorite speakers that you've had over the year?
I'm biased, and it's the only speaker that we've had twice. and her name is Pat Russell McLeod. Pat happens to be from my hometown. We, went to the same undergraduate institution, Kentucky State University and HBCU, and she is a phenomenal orator. She's a lawyer by training, was the FCC chair at one time, but when we bring Pat, she brings it.
Yeah,
and
that's
she's
good.
been my favorite speaker, hands down.
Wow.
Yeah, she was our speaker last year, and she was absolutely phenomenal for both audiences. It was a pleasure to get to know her personally. It's fun too, because Mary and I went and picked her up from the airport and were able to spend time with her. So that was great. And my history with the organization is a lot shorter, but even in the last couple of years, Ken Wadike Jr. is the free hugs guy. If any of you were
I remember
around
that.
for
Yeah,
that
sure.
one,
Yeah,
he's
I remember.
great. Such
Yeah.
a dynamic and motivational speaker.
Yeah.
Coach Herm Edwards did a great job getting everybody fired up too, because you can never have too many Hermisms that he brings to his keynote. So
Does he have a little bit of energy in there, do you think?
it's incredible. Yeah, it is. You can see why he's a coach.
He was
Yeah.
dressed like a coach when the rest of us were knotted up in tuxedos, and there he stood as coach on the stage.
Why does that not surprise me?
Right.
Who's responsible? So you guys, that's like a big get to get every. You guys got some good names there. Who gets the keynote every year? Whose job is that?
Well, there's a planning committee.
Yeah.
MLK Planning Committee, which is some of the board members of CCD and some other community members. And, we put our heads together. We see what are the hot topics going on in the country. We try to be relevant. And so sometimes we work with the Speakers Bureau. And other times we work with personal relationships.
sure.
And so they've come from a little bit of everywhere. But the person has to have some renown. The person has to be a great speaker, and they have to be relevant.
Yeah. When you look at issues today, whether there's Scottsdale specific or just across the country, what are some of the things that you see now that makes you grateful that you've got this organization alive and well and doing well, and things that we need to solve in terms of communities and leaders?
I think that in the diversity, equity, and inclusion space, there is always work to be done, and we can all be better, and it's always changing. So there's always learning opportunities as individuals and as community members and as organizations to continue to grow and develop in the space. For me, it's something I'm personally passionate about as well as professionally passionate about. So having it, intertwined into my DNA is something that's important to me, and hopefully sharing that with others is really important too, and that people understand why it's important, because there is always something that happens or that gets into the news or makes a headline that has to be addressed. And it can be an uncomfortable space for many, and having a conversation around it and being able to have civil dialogue and having the tools, I think is so crucial as a community to, again, be better, do better, all of the things. So when it comes to this space, I think there's always opportunity, and it's great that we have an organization like this that really focuses and emphasis and is the hub and the heart of the DEI space in Scottsdale.
For me, it's about bringing balance, and I hope that CCD has been one of the platforms that we could use to have those difficult conversations and understand perspectives and what people bring with them, both the good, the bad, and the ugly. If you think about the last several years, it's been a tumultuous political climate.
Yep.
Even religion has gotten into the space of politics, and equity. Through the pandemic, we've learned of some outcomes that are inequitable for certain populations. And all of those things are things that have always been there, but there always has to be an impetus to just uncover them.
Yep.
And you would think something like an illness would not, but it revealed just how different outcomes are for segments of the population. And so CCD has been a place that we could have those conversations to talk about equity and diversity and inclusion.
We need more spaces like that. The other thing that occurs to me, we've talked a lot about this, particularly in the work I'm doing on the political side right now, is how do we start listening to each other better? How do we really start at understanding being open, doing authentic listening, not just, blow you off listening, but really strong listening so we can start understanding the differences that we have and celebrate them, not be an opponent and opposing to them. And that's a hard thing to do.
Sarah, I think you should talk about this, the diversity dialogue dinner.
I was like, we're on the exact same page. So we actually hosted a dinner and dialogue this fall where we did just that. And we were able to have about 45, I believe, guests come in, and we had table hosts, which just so happened to be CCD board members, and they facilitated some guided conversation and dialogue. But really digging in kind of deep and much lower than the surface level of, general conversation that you might have with people that you haven't necessarily sat down to dinner with. So it was a wonderful template and format, which we are hoping encourages businesses to implement maybe in their own organizations with their teams and their staff and their employees, but even an opportunity to host something like that in your own home is great, to be able to invite people that maybe you don't know very well and be able to have, again, those conversations. And it's okay if you don't agree with me or what I think and where I stand, but having that understanding and empathy. And I always want to know, I want to hear why you don't agree or with me or why you feel differently. And it does give me a better understanding of where other people are coming from. And I think that's a great lesson that everybody can learn.
One of the outcomes we were hoping would occur was that this would stimulate dialogue, that this would not be a one and done, but that people would leave there and want to continue. And that's what happened from the table that I hosted. So we had a very diverse table, both from a racial standpoint, an ethnic standpoint, a religious standpoint, a professional versus non-professional standpoint. And that table is having dinner this month.
Is that right?
It's wonderful.
That's
To
good.
continue the dialogue, because there were things that were talked about that are not easy to talk about. And you have to find a place where you're comfortable in asking the questions that are difficult to ask. And sometimes reveal who you are and that you want to do better. And that was the reason we started these dialogues. And you'll hear about more of them to come.
Good. That's great stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, creating a safe space and also setting some guidelines, though, for the conversation, I think was helpful, that everybody was on the same page. And it flew by. I know it felt like we were barely scratching the surface at my table, that we could have easily gone probably a couple more hours at our dialogue.
Yeah, I bet,
I
right.
just got started.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking to you guys about, you've been around for 25 years, the organization, right? Since you had your first dinner. And I was thinking about the city itself and how much they've gained in the last 5 years. We now have a diversity inclusion person on the staff who's been a guest on our podcast before. Yeah. We also have the amendment or the
anti-discrimination ordinance.
Thank you, Sarah.
Absolutely.
That came along recently, right? I was wondering if you guys, if I know that you guys don't, the city doesn't necessarily follow what you guys do, but you guys were the precursor for all that, right? I mean, you laid the foundation that I want to see that Scottsdale wouldn't have been able to do what they've done the last couple of years without you guys blazing the trail.
Well, it's actually been 30 years. I've been on the board 25. But the 30 years, it just happened to be at the right time. There were some challenges that the city of Scottsdale was having, particularly with the police department and some of the things that we continue to hear about today.
Right.
And so that was an effort as well to bring people together and show that we are an open community, welcoming to everyone that's here. And I think through the MLK dinner and the 30 years that we've been doing it now, we've been able to develop some relationships with organizations, individuals, and cities around the valley that probably would not otherwise been connected and in partnership with the city of Scottsdale.
Fantastic. Yeah. Diversity cuts in many different ways. I think about the kinds of conversations we have in the city, whether they're political conversations or whatever, but there's even geographic diversity where, people can't talk to each other because they're so entrenched, whether you're in North Scottsdale or South Scottsdale. How do you connect with people? How do you have conversations that are good for the community, but still to the point where it requires intentional listening to be able to understand where everybody's coming from? And those are important lessons to take, I think.
Well, I remember when I first came to the Scottsdale Chamber, the The big thing was trying to figure out who these 3 Scottsdales were.
Right, right.
There was the very north end
Yep.
of Scottsdale where people were flying in on their private planes to the Scottsdale Air Park and get out and driving north. Never had anything to do with Central Scottsdale or South Scottsdale. And there were some, people think about Scottsdale as a cachet with, wealthy or those that have. And Scottsdale has its own challenges.
Sure does.
Of unique demographic from socioeconomic standpoint, some diversity that sometimes the community is unaware of. And so CCD has helped to bridge that gap and be a part of the growth in creating a linear sort of line through Scottsdale and bringing North and South together.
Love it. We have some more work to do along those lines, but you know what? The work continues.
Absolutely.
It makes good sense.
It's possible to have good conversation in this town.
It is.
Right? It is
Yeah.
possible. So the work that you guys are doing is really important because it gives us all hope that we can all have a good conversation with each other.
Absolutely.
Sometimes I think we just need to stop and say we need to be intentional about it.
Right.
And when we're intentional about it, we can make it happen. But when we just let it fly by, that's when we don't get anything done together.
Right.
That's right.
Great conversation. I love what you guys are doing. I love the fact that you have such an emphasis on youth and developing our youth and continue the legacy and sustainability of what you're all doing and making our community a better place.
Yeah, and we'd be
Fantastic.
remiss if we didn't make mention that every year we award a diversity champion in our community as well.
I forgot to ask about that. Let's talk about who she is this year.
Yes, you know what? I'm going to let Marion take this one because he actually knows her. So
Well, I'm delighted that a colleague of mine from Mayo, Dr. Alex Porter,
Yeah.
who is a neuro-oncologist, that means she's a brain cancer specialist. Dr. Porter happens to also be the only African-American female neuro-oncologist in the country.
No kidding. Wow.
And it's a great thing that she's first, but that's not a good thing either, because there are several young women who come behind her, who came ahead of her, that could have done the very same thing. She is so unique in that she saw the challenge of minority kids going into healthcare, into practicing medicine, that she has developed a scholarship not-for-profit organization that give young people renewable scholarships to medical school so that their decision on what kind of medicine they practice is not constrained about how much debt they have.
Good for her.
And so there are students that get $10,000 scholarships. There are students that get full tuition scholarships. And she has done that now for several years, and I'm absolutely proud to call her my colleague.
What a fantastic award recipient, right?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. I'm sure there's a lot more people who are like Marion said, who's probably deserving of it and hope we'll get in the future.
Hope so too. Yeah. Well, what a great conversation. Kevin, any other questions for these?
No,
two? Yeah.
this is a great event you guys do. I like to hear more about what you're doing outside of the Martin Luther King dinner, because that's an important part. It's your main fundraiser, you said, but to hear about this, the dialogue that you had this last fall, and to hear about the youth that gets involved, and they get to hear from a keynote too. You're doing a lot of really cool stuff.
Sarah Kearney, Marion Kelly, thank you so much for being with us today. But more importantly, thanks you so much for all the work you're doing in this space with making our community a better place for everybody. We sure appreciate that. And I look forward to getting you back on board for another podcast down the road. So thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Don.
thank you.
And thanks to all of you for listening today. We look forward to being back with you again for our next edition of Today and Tomorrow in Scottsdale.